Section: Introduction. We're exploring how language models, which are great at predicting the next word in a sentence, sometimes get things wrong by presenting factual errors, biases, and other issues. To fix this, there's a process called language model alignment. This process involves training these models with datasets that show what kind of responses are preferred and which ones aren't, according to human judgment. This helps the models to produce answers that are more engaging, helpful, and unbiased. One popular method for doing this is called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. It starts by creating a model that can judge responses the way a human would. Then, it uses reinforcement learning to fine-tune the language model to produce better responses based on this judgment model. Some newer methods try to skip the step of creating a separate judgment model by directly adjusting the language model based on what humans prefer. Despite the different approaches, the goal remains the same: to make the language model behave in a more desirable way without losing its original charm and ability to fluently generate text. To make sure the adjusted model doesn't stray too far from its original training, a technique called regularization is used, often involving something called Kullback-Leibler (KL) divergence. This technique helps the model to remember what it learned during its initial training while still improving its behavior. However, finding the perfect balance of regularization is tricky. Too much, and the model won't change enough. Too little, and it might start acting in unwanted ways, a problem known as reward hacking. Usually, finding the right balance involves a lot of trial and error, which can be especially hard with large models. In our study, we introduce a new idea called Decoding-time Realignment, DeRa. Think of it as a tweak to how the model comes up with responses, allowing us to adjust how much it leans towards the original or the aligned model on the fly. This means we can change the level of adjustment based on the situation or user needs without having to retrain the model. It's a more efficient way to find the right level of regularization. We've made a few key contributions through our work. 1. We've shown that models adjusted with different levels of KL regularization are essentially mixing the original model with a single aligned model in different proportions. 2. We've developed DeRa, a new method that lets us simulate these mixtures in a way that's automatic and can be adjusted during the model's use, not just during its training. 3. Our experiments show that DeRa makes it easier to control how much the model is adjusted, speeds up the process of fine-tuning these adjustments, and improves how well the model performs specific tasks. Now, let's dive a bit into the background. Language models are essentially programs that predict what word comes next based on the words that came before. They're trained on huge amounts of text and then fine-tuned for specific tasks like answering questions or writing in a certain style. This fine-tuning can be done in a couple of ways: by training on examples of good responses, SFT, or by comparing pairs of responses and learning which one is better, pairwise preference fine-tuning. Pairwise preference fine-tuning is particularly interesting because it's based on human judgments about which responses are better, making it a form of reinforcement learning from human feedback. The challenge here is to adjust the model so it prefers responses that humans like while still keeping it close to its original training. This involves a delicate balance, managed by a parameter that controls how much the model can deviate from its original behavior. However, finding the right setting for this parameter is hard and usually requires a lot of experimentation. Section summary. Language models trained through self-supervised learning often exhibit factual errors and biases, which language model alignment aims to address. This alignment can be achieved through reinforcement learning from human feedback or by directly aligning the model from human preferences, with the goal of adopting desirable behaviors without sacrificing the model's fluency. The proposed decoding-time realignment, DeRa, method allows for controlling the degree of regularization at decoding time without retraining, offering an efficient means of tuning the regularization strength hyperparameter and facilitating performance trade-offs in downstream tasks. Section: Importance of the reward regularization trade-off. We're discussing the importance of finding the right balance between rewards and regularization when training models. The parameter beta plays a key role here. If beta is too high, the model sticks too closely to the standard model it's being aligned with, which can limit its effectiveness. On the other hand, if beta is too low, the model might stray too far from the standard model, leading to issues like overfitting to rewards and losing important qualities like coherence and topic relevance. Previous research has shown that letting the model deviate more from the standard model, which means a higher KL divergence, can lead to better rewards, but the quality of the generated content might suffer. This was particularly noted in tasks like summarization, where models with higher divergence from the standard model initially produced better summaries but eventually the quality dropped due to overfitting. There was also an observation of a linear relationship between the reward and the square root of the KL divergence. To find the best balance between rewards and regularization, traditionally, multiple models are trained with different levels of KL divergence and then evaluated. However, this process is resource-intensive. To address this, we introduce a method called Decoding-time Realignment. This method allows us to adjust the balance without retraining the model by using a new parameter, lambda, at the time of decoding. We show that it's possible to adjust the model's alignment by recalculating the probabilities of its responses, essentially reweighting them based on the importance ratio between the aligned model and the standard model, adjusted by lambda. For practical purposes, since computing the exact probabilities over all possible sequences is too complex, we simplify the process. We generate responses one token at a time, using an approximation that relies on the model's ability to predict the next token based on the previous ones. Lastly, we touch on how to generate tokens more efficiently. The process might seem complicated, but we explain that by using a mathematical trick related to averages, we can simplify the calculations. This makes it easier to combine the influences of the standard model and the aligned model when predicting the next token in a sequence. The detailed proof of this simplification is provided in the appendix of our paper. Section Summary. The section emphasizes the importance of balancing the reward and KL divergence in training aligned models, as a large beta value limits alignment effectiveness, while a small beta can lead to reward hacking. Decoding-time realignment is introduced as a way to investigate the reward-KL trade-off without retraining each model, allowing for the modulation of the importance ratio using the configurable scalar lambda. Additionally, an autoregressive approximation of the realigned model is proposed to enhance efficiency in computing the conditional distribution over response sequences. Section Interpretation. We're discussing how a certain term blends two types of model outputs, the reference model outputs and the aligned model outputs. The mix is controlled by a parameter we call lambda, which adjusts the strength of a specific type of regulation known as KL regularization. When lambda is set to 0, this regulation is at its strongest, essentially infinite, and we get the output of the reference model. On the other hand, setting lambda to 1 makes the regulation strength normal, and we get the output of the aligned model. By changing lambda, we can explore different balances between sticking to the original model's behavior and adjusting it according to our needs. Interestingly, lambda can be more than 1, which means we're reducing the regulation strength compared to a baseline. We've tried this out with lambda values like 2, 5, and 10 in our experiments. For implementation, we found it quite straightforward to generate new outputs from our adjusted model. We do this by mixing the outputs of the reference and aligned models based on our lambda setting and then picking tokens based on this mix. This method allows us to smoothly transition between the reference and aligned models' behaviors. Although we mainly use a specific model type as our reference in these examples, this approach can work with various model types, including those that are pre-trained. Regarding computational costs, our method allows us to experiment with different regulation strengths without needing to retrain models from scratch, which saves a lot of time and computational resources. However, because we're combining outputs from two models, this does double the time and memory needed for decoding. We suggest that combining model weights instead of their outputs could be a more efficient alternative, despite some loss in performance. Another strategy could be to use our method to find the most promising regulation strengths and then retrain models only at those specific settings, reducing the need for extensive trial and error. In our experiments, We wanted to see how well our method could balance between the reference and aligned models and help us find the best setting for KL regulation. We tested this across various tasks like summarization, reducing hallucinations in outputs, and dialogue generation. Our process involved starting with a specific model, aligning it with our desired outcomes using KL regulation, and then generating outputs with our method to see how well it performed compared to models retrained from scratch. Our findings suggest that our method can serve as a reliable approximation of retraining, allowing for efficient tuning of regulation strength without the computational overhead of full retraining. This is particularly useful in scenarios where we're trying to find a balance between achieving specific outcomes and maintaining overall model quality, as demonstrated in our summarization task example. Section summary. The term lambda h caret theta underscore t beta plus 1 lambda h caret sft underscore t linearly combines the reference logits h caret sft underscore t and aligned logits h caret theta underscore t, with the balancing parameter lambda controlling the KL regularization strength. This allows for exploring different reward regularization trade-offs, and when lambda greater than 1, it means that the realigned model uses a smaller regularization strength than the base KL strength. The approach of combining logits from two models in DeRa doubles the decoding time and memory compared to standard decoding, but it allows for efficient testing of various regularization strengths without retraining, and facilitates the tuning of regularization strength without the need for retraining models. Section. Controlling alignment, a qualitative demonstration. We're here to show how DeRa can be used to fine-tune the alignment of chat models during the decoding process, using some hands-on examples. We worked with Zephyr 7b models, which are essentially chat models that have been further refined based on the Mistral 7b model. The versions of these models that we used, including those that have been specifically aligned, are available for anyone to check out. In particular, we focused on an aligned Zephyr 7b model that was adjusted to have a specific setting, let's call it beta, of 0.1. This adjustment was made by training it with a special technique called SFT, using a set of binary preference samples from something called the Ultra Feedback Dataset. For those interested in the nitty-gritty details, there's more information available on this process. With both the original SFT model and our newly aligned model in hand, we used DeRa, a specific algorithm, to experiment with models that had been realigned with different settings. We looked at how changing a parameter, let's call it lambda, in DeRa could control the alignment strength. We tested a range of lambda values and found that tweaking this parameter lets us meaningfully adjust how aligned the model is. Moving on to a more complex task, we tried to learn how to summarize text using a dataset from Reddit. Our aim was to see if DeRa could help us find the best setting for controlling how strict the alignment is during this summarization task. To start, we trained a base model using a technique known as SFT, based on a pre-existing model called T5 large. Then, we trained another T5 large model to act as a reward model using a specific dataset. After that, we went through a process called alignment training to fine-tune the model's performance, keeping the alignment strictness at a specific setting. When applying DeRa, we experimented with different settings to see if any could perform better than the original setting. We tried a wide range of values, some of which pushed the boundaries of what we expected could work. Our goal was to really test the limits and see if DeRa could still provide useful results with these extreme values. To evaluate how well the different settings worked, we used a very capable model called POM2 large as a judge. We generated responses to a bunch of queries from a test dataset and had the POM2 model pick which responses were better. We compared the performance of models with different settings to see which ones came out on top. Our findings showed two main things. First, DeRa was great at identifying settings that performed better than the original setting. Second, the results from DeRa were generally in line with those from models that had been trained from scratch, even when we were pushing the boundaries with higher values. This agreement suggests that DeRa is not only cost-effective but also a reliable way to figure out the best settings for controlling alignment strength. Section Summary. The section demonstrates the ability of DeRa to control alignment during decoding using qualitative examples and Zephyr 7b models. By training on binary preference samples from the ultra-feedback dataset, the configurable parameter lambda in DeRa meaningfully controls the degree of alignment. The findings show that DeRa effectively identifies KL strengths that outperform the default strength and generally agrees well with retrained models, even in the extrapolation regime. Section. Under and over regularization. We've observed that our model, which we'll call DeRa, can both identify when it's been given too much or too little regulation. In one instance, we noticed that DeRa seemed to be working too strictly under its rules. By reducing the strictness of these rules, specifically by adjusting the KL regularization to a smaller fraction for values greater than 1, we saw an improvement in performance. This was confirmed when we retrained models with this adjustment. Additionally, we found that DeRa could also spot when a model wasn't regulated enough. In these cases, DeRa suggested increasing the strictness of the rules for better results, which means using a fraction smaller than 1. Moving on to a different application, we used DeRa to tackle the issue of hallucination in text generation, particularly in the context of retrieval augmented generation, RAG, which is a technique used by search engines like Bing and Google. Our goal was to rewrite lists of pros and cons in a way that stayed true to the original meaning without adding any new, made-up information. To do this, we first trained a model called POM2 to recognize good results. Then, we used another technique, LoRa, to fine-tune a second POM2 model, making sure it was regulated to avoid making things up, with a specific setting for the regulation strength. We experimented with different levels of regulation by adjusting a parameter we call lambda, which changed how strictly the model was regulated. Our experiments showed that the level of regulation significantly affects how the model rewrites text. With less regulation, the model tended to make more stuff up, similar to what the original model did. As we increased the regulation, the model got better at sticking to the original content without adding anything new. However, if we regulated it too much, the text became less natural, and the model would just repeat the original text without any of the desired rephrasing. We also looked into how to balance different goals when training models, something other studies have explored as well. Unlike those studies, which combined multiple models each trained for a different goal, our approach focuses on aligning a model with a reference model while also keeping it regulated. This is similar to another technique called emulated fine-tuning, EFT, which looks at how models can be adjusted at different scales and stages of training. Our method is like EFT in that we combine the outputs of trained models, but our aim is to find a good balance between achieving the task and keeping the model in check. Lastly, we discussed other methods that also combine outputs from different models, like contrastive decoding and classifier-free guidance decoding. These methods have their own goals, such as increasing diversity or sticking closer to prompts, but they don't focus on realigning models like we do.